Hi and welcome back to Bike Speed. So this week we're dealing with this Trek hybrid bike. This is a stripped down service. We're dealing with the drivetrain mainly on this bike, but the rear wheel actually had 4 broken spokes. The wheel had began to give out, and this is an example of a bike where it's been used until failure. So you can see here it's got spokes taped up, and it's been used and used and used until eventually it can be used no more, and that's where us as a bike shop come in. We get a lot of comments, people sort of commenting on bikes about the condition of them, but in the nature of this bike, being a hybrid bike, I know this bike is used for someone who uses it to go to an allotment. They go around a field in extremely dusty, dirty conditions, and actually although this bike was quite worn on the drivetrain, once we cleaned it up, actually there was not an awful lot wrong with this bike. So it's we haven't all got time to wash bikes. So I know this rider would much rather be out in the sunshine on his allotment, and is more than happy to bring a bike to someone like ourselves to get it organised and sorted out. So we're stripping the bike down. With this we're going to do a new chain, a new cassette, a new chain set at the front, the spokes in the wheels, brake pads. We're going to replace all the cables on this bike. But interestingly, this bike actually didn't need an awful lot of work bearing wise, which I'll explain as we go a little bit down the video. So you can see here on this rear derailleur how that debris there that is really compacted and is running around the cage, and the cage is smoothing out the debris as it's picking up. So we're going to deal with that during the cleaning process. We removed the brake pads. The brake pads on this one were very, very worn. You can see here how a new pad compares to the old worn pad. There's no gripping on that old pad anymore, and even just where I'm pointing to there is through to the metalwork that actually sort of sustains the shape of it. So that pad was life extinct. It was absolutely on the end of its duties, and so we replaced all the pads on the bike. You can see the front derailleur, it's dirty, it's dry, but actually it's actuating perfectly. There's nothing wrong with it. So again, those sort of parts we can clean up. Again, you can see here quite a bit of play in this pedal because one of the screws was missing, but actually bearing wise there was nothing wrong with this pedal, so a new screw in there and tightening up the others dealt with that. But this chain set was worn, as was mainly the drivetrain on this bike. That was really the key to why it was here with us. So we take off these old chain set parts and we discard those, and we'll be replacing those. But in the meantime, we're getting everything down. We're beginning to sort of get to the stage where the way we work is we would strip a bike down, weigh up what we need to replace, put all the parts that we're salvaging into the ultrasonic cleaner, get those cleaned up and lubricated, and then put on new parts coupled with old parts to really bring the bike up to spec. So we are replacing all the cables on this, and what I'm now doing is I'm just putting through cable guides so that when I pull out the old cables, I've got some form of guide to make my job of replacing that cable a little bit easier. If I leave a little tube in there, I can feed my new cable into that tube, remove that tube along the way, and it just sort of helps my guiding. It's a little bit easier than if a frame has got no cables in it at all to use the old cables to guide your new cables in. So that was what I was just doing there, was sorting out the tubing and everything. So next up, we're stripping down everything ready for the ultrasonic clean. You can see here the debris on these jockey wheels. They were pretty heavily soiled, as you can see there, with debris and grease, and it is what it is. So we clean all that up. If you're new to the channel, we do notice in the comments, we get a lot of comments about where people are in the world. We love to read those comments because it really gives us a sense of how far we are reaching in the world. So do drop a comment in the comments. If you ever look at a map of the UK, you'll see it's sort of got a little bobble out on the right hand side, and we are based in that bobble. We are actually at the most easterly point in the UK in Lowestoft in Suffolk. We're literally a mile away from the most easterly point of the UK, so we often trip down to the seafront, and there's a little sort of, I don't know what you call it really, but there's a circular disc with measurements to various miles to various places in the world, and you can actually ride around that disc. So often we'll go down to Nest Point, ride around the disc and home. So like I say, we're on the most easterly point in the UK. So do drop a comment, let us know where you are. And you can see here we're now just lubricating up all these parts. A little bit of Loctite on these bolts here that hold the derailleur together. That's never a bad practice, just to stop that ever coming loose, and lubricating all the pivot points here and everything else. We've got other videos that show our lubrication processes. You can find that one on our channel, little videos specifically for our lubrication processes. But we're using the premium grease, white grease, copper grease, silicone grease, thin oils. We use so many different sort of lubricants, often on the same components. So even this one has had 2 or 3 lubricants to get that right. So you can see I'm just addressing that pedal that had the loose frame, so a new threaded screw into there and tighten up everything on there, copper slip on the threads, ready to go back together. And now we're just going to address this wheel. Now, like I say, this wheel actually had 4 broken spokes, and in all honesty, the bearings on this wheel weren't brilliant. But given the nature of the way the bike's used, I advised the customer that, you know, this may need a wheel replacement in due course, because a wheel of this nature is not expensive in comparison with repairing the bearings and everything, so it would be more wise to replace it. So I just advised on that. Now you can see here, this inner tube has the slime solution inside it, and it obviously leaked at some point and actually gummed up the valve, so you couldn't get air into the tyre. So it was completely gummed up there. So I removed the core before removing the tyre and the tube and the rim tape, because obviously we need to put new spokes in. So you can see here how this bike would have been riding down the road, banging on the brakes, possibly touching the frame. It was ready for its service. He couldn't have done many more miles like that before either the wheel would have collapsed or he would have just come to a grinding halt. So we're putting new spokes in. We've got all those in stock, so we're just putting some fresh spokes in, the ones that are broken, and then we just start our truing up process where we get the wheel. You can see there I put some spoke freeze on the nipples, get the wheel roughly in place, and then I'll measure the tensions around the wheel, and I'll go around both sides with a tension meter to get them roughly right. Then I'll drill down the truing of the wheel, and then I'll go around them a second time with a tension meter to make sure they're within tolerances of the. You can see there I'm just using the meter there and just doing minor adjustments going around the wheel until I know that wheel is all within the tolerance, you know, specification. You can see there what difference we've made to that wheel. So 4 new spokes, a bit of retention in, that wheel is good to go. It'll still do, you know, many hundreds of miles, if not thousands of miles. So it's not quite ready for a replacement, but it is certainly on the tail end of its life. But we've extended that life with the service, which is what servicing is all about. So whack a new core in there. You can see a new valve core, and so the tyre can then be inflated and deflated quite easily. On goes our new cassette, a little bit of grease on that hub first, just so we make sure it doesn't stick and corrode together. And now we just start up our cleaning process. So initially we use a soap spray, then we use our detailing brush and work that all around the frame and in all the nooks and crannies. The little nylon brush there, that sort of really gets in all the ingrained dirt in, you know, around screw holes and threads and bottom brackets and everything else like that. So in terms of the bearings on this bike, the bottom bracket felt okay. It wasn't too bad. The rear wheel, like I say, was a little bit ropey, but still had a few hundred, if not thousands of miles in it. The headset bearings felt perfect. You begin to sort of, with experience, you begin to feel how the bearings feel. You begin to know whether they're grinding, sticking, the sound of them and everything else. And so, although, like I say, this bike needed quite a lot of work, actually bearing work was one of the things it didn't really need doing. The bearings on it were all absolutely fine, so that's why they're not being showcased in this video, because actually they didn't need doing. So we're just now T-cutting the frame. There's T-cutting, polishing, washing down. They all sort of vary according to the bike. We don't always guarantee we're going to T-cut a bike down or polish it or even wash it down. Some bikes come in absolutely immaculate. They just need a wipe over with a microfiber, you know, soft towel. So in this case, we T-cutted the bike down because there were a lot of marks and scratches and discolorations along the frame. Film, obviously, because you saw how dirty the bike was. So we T-cut it down. Then we're going to use this, the super resin polish. This, most bikes we do polish with this. You know, there's very few bikes where on a stripped down service where we don't polish it with this. So next up, super resin polish. That just brings off all the sort of smudging and everything from the T-cut and any of the road film. It just gets all that off and can absolutely make a difference to a bike. Now this bike had a satin finish, and you can see on the fork and on the down tube there how that satin finish doesn't go away because you effectively using a resin polish on the bike. What you're doing is cleaning off the debris. You're not changing the finish of the paint, so you can see that the bike has still got its satin finish even after being polished. We're just replacing the brakes now. We put new bolts that hold the brakes to the frame because they were rusty, and just nice just to have fresh ones with, you know, a job like this. So we're replacing the brakes, new brake pads. We're using a little bit of general purpose grease there before putting the new chain set on, because like I say, we replaced the drivetrain on this bike, so it's got a new chain set, new chain, new cassette. We're just, you know, going around the bike now. So once we've put the bike back together, which you can see we're now doing, we're just getting everything in place, everything back on the bike. The next phase for us then is we sort of loosely tighten everything up initially because some things need altering, especially on derailleurs and cables and things. So we'll get everything back on the bike sort of hand tight and not really beyond. Now we're going to recable the bike, and it's really, once we've got things like the brakes, so we're checking here, everything's working, check the alignment of the pads, get all the cables on, and then it's after that stage where we then actually torque all the bolts we've, right through the bike. We go through the bike with the torque wrench. So we've done all our adjustments, so you can see here we've checked the brake, everything's adjusted, cables all nipped off, all the ends put on, everything lubricated. And then it's once we're at that stage that we then go through the bike with the torque wrench. So we're just getting the final sort of workings of the cables. You can see I've just used those guides that I had to get the cables back in, and then we can just adjust up the gearing just to make sure everything's working as it should. Again, lubricating the shifters. It's a methodical process through a bike. Yeah, it takes a bit of time, but it's always worthwhile, just going through it methodically, front to back. You'll build those up over many years. New handlebar grips on this. We use hair lacquer just to spray that on the handlebar. That helps, one, the new the new grip go on the handlebar, and two, it also helps stick it to that handlebar so that it doesn't move. So we even put new grips on this bike because that's the tactile bit that the customer feels, so you want that to be feeling nice. And now you can see we're just beginning to go through with the torque wrench. So we're doing the stem bolts, the shifters, the brakes, the pinch bolts, the pads, the mounts. We literally go through an entire bike with a torque wrench just to make sure. And again, we work front to back, so we've done stem handlebars, saddles, seat posts, etc. Then we go down to the bottom bracket area, so we'll be doing the front derailleur, the chain set, the pedals and everything at that section. Then we move to the rear brake and we do that section, so that's what we're now doing there. And then we move to the rear derailleur and we do the mount and the pinch bolts and everything on the rear derailleur. So we've worked literally front to back right the way through the bike. And then the final thing we do is go through accessories, and we always do those by hand because if they've got plastic fittings, aluminium fittings, carbon frames and all the rest of it, we don't want them to be torqued up too tight, so we always do those by feel with hand. So you can see here on the before and afters what a massive difference we've made to this bike. It's amazing what you can do with a bike. So thanks for watching. Do like, do subscribe, do leave a comment, and we'll see you next week.